At this point, we'd like to open things up to some discussion topics. The first topic, actually, before we do that, I'd like to ask the panelists if you'd open up your video and be ready to jump in here. So the first question we'd like to talk about is key elements of the business use case that supported a spectrum purchase. So areas similar to but not limited to financial considerations, availability and choice of equipment, bandwidth, price, and prospects of new technology. So does somebody want to jump in and start? And then if you have questions, if participants have questions, feel free to type them into the chat and we'll address them as they come in.
One of the things that we had to do was find a couple of big internal customers that had some big challenges that we could use this wider field layer network to kind of justify what we were doing and when. So things like metering, really getting after a couple of big places to justify the initial purchase so that we can, make it available to wider customers.
All right. Stephen, you have something?
Yeah, just with the size of our service territory, we were really looking for more of an enterprise solution. And prior to that, if we weren't using unlicensed spectrum, which we all know that the pitfalls of that, which is another reason why I know everybody's worrying about that in the microwave level with 6 gigahertz potentially being opened up to lots of consumer devices. But where we wanted to get licensed spectrum, it was really hit or miss. On a county by county basis, we would really have to scratch and claw at what's available, and we just didn't want to keep doing that. We wanted to have one consistent platform across 6 states, and this was the best opportunity for us to do that at a reasonable price point, where we're not talking about a big wide band that would be cost prohibitive.
All right, we do have some questions coming in now. So the first question is for Kathy. Can you please elaborate what the criteria is for switching from 700 megahertz A block to cellular backhaul? Is it based on aggregated data that triggers the switch?
So I know that it's somehow internal in the Cisco 829. I'm not a network engineer, so I don't know the rules that they wrote in order for this to happen. But once the router senses that the 700 network has been down, I believe it's set for 3 minutes where it's not seeing a connection there, then it just automatically fails over to the cellular network. Then once it's able to detect 700 is back online, it just automatically switches back. So that's my understanding of it. I don't know the internals and how it all works, but that's a high level.
There's a couple other things I would expand on, Kathy. Obviously, you know this a lot more than I do, but 700 megahertz is our primary preferred method of communication from a cost perspective. So basically, we already have the spectrum, so that's what we want to use. We use LTE as a backup if we need it. We've had some instances where members are using our network and they needed more throughput than we could provide for the 700 network. So we actually have them running primary on the LTE network and using 700 as the backup. But for GRE uses, we use 700 as our primary and just use LTE when we need it. Next question, I'm assuming this is for Jarrod. With the FAN deployments, what is the backup connection if the 700 network is impaired?
Once we move to the 700 megahertz, we don't really have a backup on a per radio basis. Like I said, if a tier 2, we have a backup base station that the end user station could go to. But outside of that, we're not running LTE as a backup or anything like that. We do have, in places where the FAN doesn't exist, we do offer some. We have some users using LTE or 900 megahertz unlicensed, things like that.
All right. Next one. This is probably for everybody. How has your organization approached capitalizing the purchase of the spectrum versus O&M? I can cover this for GRE's perspective. So we are planning to use capital. So we've been leasing the spectrum, as Kathy mentioned, since about 2006, and that was all an O&M hit. But now that we're planning to purchase it, we're actually going to use capital to do the purchase.
And that's consistent with FirstEnergy as well. It was 100% capital when we purchased it in 2017 and 2018. And we allocated that across our operating companies and between transmission and distribution based on our expected usage.
The next question is pretty long, but I think it's relatively straightforward. For the overall panel and for those who perform detailed business case modeling, outside of the benefits of greater reliability and control, if commercial cellular is considered as a competing solution for a private FAN, possibly with dual SIM, at what point does the model move from public to private in terms of the quantity of endpoint devices or a given density of base stations serving these devices?
So we didn't necessarily do that level of modeling, but I can tell you that from a strategic standpoint, our rallying cry is to be as free from the telecom carriers as humanly possible. As you saw in my presentation, we have about 3,100 cellular devices out there right now, and that was mainly due to expediency to get them off of the analog lease circuits. And we routinely see entire sections of states when the wireless carriers have issues. We will see hundreds of substations go down. So the faster we can get them off of those solutions, the better.
Yeah, I would say we cellular is fantastic as a backup, but we wouldn't rely on it as our primary. Like Stephen was saying, we had issues early on when we first were installing cellular backup, where I think we had about 100 substations on it at that point, and one day just all of them dropped, and you try calling into the carrier, and it's not just us, it's a whole bunch of people having the same issue. You can't get a hold of anyone. You have no ETA on when they're going to be back online. Unfortunately, this was just a backup at this point, so not such a big deal. But if we had been relying on this as our primary, and then you have system operations going, what's going on? When is it going to be back on? You go, I have no idea. We're just down. So not what we'd want to rely on for primary.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's no way for us to get priority, guaranteed service levels, things like that. So it's more than that than density or or availability of towers. It's just not being able to have that priority when and if things do happen. Not being able to guarantee bandwidth when there's congestion. Those are the things that are the big drivers.
Yeah, I would have to agree with all the other panelists. I think the one thing that really kind of drove it home for us is we actually utilize cellular backhaul for a lot of our IoT infrastructure today. And initially, when things were rolled out, it was a sensor data that's nice to have that, kind of will help us. And now it's become critical. And we actually had a loss of service. And the biggest thing for us is there is no priority and, no dedicated SLA for the utility.